Congratulations and thank you for your decisive action on Iran. That was truly extraordinary. With these effusive words, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, greeted President Donald Trump as he stepped onto the stage at the NATO summit in The Hague. Can you believe that a few short years ago, many declared there was no chance these leaders would ever see eye to eye? Yet here we are, watching the alliance Trump once criticized now bestow high praise upon him for catalyzing not just a new defense spending target, but also a much-discussed ceasefire between Israel and Iran. So, what on earth is actually happening behind the doors of NATO's meeting halls in The Hague? And why does it matter so much for the future of global security? Today, we will take this story apart piece by piece and uncover why President Trump's surprising rapport with once cautious European leaders has upended traditional alliances, challenged old budget assumptions, and sparked hopes in certain corners of Europe for a stronger, more unified continent. In 3 parts, we are going to explore how Trump's demands for greater defense contributions are reshaping the spending habits of European states, the tense but crucial appearance of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the summit, and the remarkable negotiation that halted a spiraling conflict between Israel and Iran, albeit precariously. In this deep dive, we will pose the most burning questions. Is this shift to 5% defense spending truly feasible for smaller NATO states? Why is Zelenskyy's presence at the summit so critical, and how are other world leaders responding to his desire for Ukraine to join the alliance? And most intriguingly, can the success of the Israel-Iran ceasefire, brokered by the White House, really prevent a devastating Middle Eastern conflict? We will explore every angle, from the steep hurdles faced by countries that have historically struggled to meet even the old 2% NATO guideline to the fresh uncertainty introduced by President Trump's offhand remark that mutual defense might just hinge on one's definition of Article 5. Stay with us, because by the end, you will have a far clearer sense of these monumental changes and exactly how they might affect your life. Now, let us begin by rewinding the timeline just enough to remember the building tensions that have characterized the relationship between President Trump and NATO, which encompasses much of Europe, plus North America. In the early days of his presidency, Trump took a tough stance, proclaiming that members of the alliance were not contributing their fair share of defense spending. He bluntly pointed out that the United States had, for decades, contributed the lion's share of NATO's operational and defense costs compared to its European partners. This criticism exploded into headlines. Pundits predicted an imminent collapse of transatlantic relations, heads of state bristled at the harsh words, and analysts on every political spectrum asked, could this be the end of NATO as we know it? Yet, flash forward to this momentous summit. Not only do we see President Trump and Secretary General Rutte engaging in warm exchanges, but we also witness a brand new agreement among NATO members to ramp up their defense spending to 5%. Spelled out in Sunday's closed-door negotiations, this dramatic increase far surpasses the 2% threshold that allies first set in the year 2006. European nations had already faced pressure to meet the older standard. Many critics noted that, aside from a few notable exceptions like Poland and Estonia, most countries were nowhere near the original 2% goal. Yet, with President Trump's prodding, crafty persuasion, and at times thorny diplomacy, the alliance agreed to shoot even higher. Of course, one might rightfully question, why jump all the way to 5% if some countries are still hovering around 1 and a few tenths percent or even less? According to the statements emerging from the summit, the new 5% target is broken down as 3.5% for core defense spending, complemented by 1.5% for other defense-related infrastructure, such as cyber warfare capabilities, intelligence operations, and highly specialized training. It sounds fantastic on paper. Under this formula, the NATO alliance collectively aims to develop a robust network of advanced weaponry, digital security measures, and properly educated intelligence officers, far beyond the scope of what it had in place just a decade ago. Yet one could almost hear the sighs of exasperation from smaller or historically underengaged nations, such as Spain, which has repeatedly struggled to keep pace with defense commitments. Critics suspect that meeting 5% will be extremely difficult, requiring major budget reallocation at a time when many European economies are grappling with inflation, social welfare costs, and still curbing the aftermath of an unprecedented global health crisis a few years ago. Some complain that President Trump's unrelenting stance oversimplifies the complexities of European defense frameworks, particularly as some countries prefer to supplement conventional defensive measures with specialized actions, such as intelligence sharing and targeted development programs in crisis-prone regions. Yet for supporters of the new policy, including the newly vocal Mark Rutte, the strengthened target is precisely the wake-up call needed to stop giving Russia any illusions that it can outmaneuver or outproduce the West. Therein lies the next chapter of our story, the Russia factor. Rutte has been particularly adamant that NATO, with its member states collectively dwarfing Russia's gross domestic product many times over, should possess a military capacity so formidable that no one stands a chance at aggression. Fueled by the ongoing regional tensions, from the eastern borders of the European Union to the near-constant specter of potential conflicts involving energy resources, this aim is central to his rhetoric. Behind the scenes, multiple European defense ministers have been scrambling to figure out how to cheaply and efficiently upgrade everything from aerial surveillance fleets to advanced logistical networks. If we pause right there, it is a perfect time to reflect. Is this pivot of spending, so heavily emphasized by Trump, reflective of a more lasting American presence in NATO, or does it hint at a deeper potential withdrawal? On one hand, the official line from the United States mission to NATO, as echoed by Ambassador Matthew Whitaker, is that the United States is not going anywhere. On the other hand, there was that slight edge in President Trump's voice when a reporter pressed him on the question of honoring NATO's Mutual Defense Clause, Article 5, which stipulates that an attack on one member is considered an attack on all. Instead of offering an outright commitment, Trump vaguely responded that it depends on the definition. To many watchers in Europe, that was a jarring moment. Traditional alliances between the United States and NATO were always framed around an unbreakable vow of collective defense. By introducing even a shred of ambiguity, President Trump has rattled some nerves across the Atlantic. Even Rutte, whose effusive praise seems to indicate a new closeness with the American president, tried to reassure allies that the primary burden is on them to bolster their defenses in the first place. The subtext is clear. Trump may be friendly, but he also wants to make absolutely sure that the old paradigm of the United States footing the bill, while others do the bare minimum, is over. If that were not enough excitement, we have the second major storyline, the presence of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the summit. It is no secret that Ukraine has long sought NATO membership to guarantee protection from external threats. Though it is a complicated matter, overshadowed by unresolved conflicts and the intricate tapestry of European security concerns, Zelenskyy's presence is widely seen as a symbolic statement of unity, particularly as tensions with Russia simmer in the distance. President Trump, who publicly stated that he would probably greet the Ukrainian leader, faces a delicate balance. On the one hand, rallying for Europe's defenses and upholding the notion of supporting Ukraine. On the other, trying to keep the lines of communication with Russia open enough to prevent future escalations. Such is the labyrinth of modern geopolitics. Direct confrontation with Russia might loom in the background, but so too does the question of how to sustain any workable relationship with Moscow should the situation intensify. Allies sympathetic to Ukraine's push for formal membership caution that an overly antagonistic stance might provoke a more dangerous standoff. Meanwhile, those more skeptical about immediate membership worry that granting Ukraine any form of shortcut acceptance into NATO risks turning an already tense situation into a fully fledged confrontation. It is a conundrum that many foreign policy experts have debated for years. Now, with Zelenskyy physically present at a summit championed by the Trump administration, the stakes feel higher than ever before. Amid these swirling questions, we have to revisit that almost unbelievable claim from Rutte in a text message shared apparently by Trump himself, applauding the American leader's game-changing role in brokering an end to the recent outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Iran. The Middle East has historically been a region of deep complexity for NATO countries, with alliances tested, redefined, and sometimes twisted by competing interests and different perspectives on local conflicts. So, imagine the shock that accompanied the news of a ceasefire hammered out with White House involvement. Many in the global community held their breath, certain that one or both sides might back out at the last minute. Indeed, the agreement almost collapsed. However, when Israel seemed ready to mount a new counterattack, President Trump apparently urged them to stand down. And they did, at least for the moment. Is it truly such a grand triumph for the Trump administration, or does this ceasefire rest on fragile ground and risk unraveling at the faintest spark? Rutte, for his part, seems certain that Trump's intervention makes us all safer. Yet the Middle East's long history of conflict begs caution. Regionally, watchers are mindful that tensions between Israel and Iran do not simply vanish overnight. Skeptics note that a ceasefire does not necessarily address the deeper causes of hostility, such as disputes over nuclear research and the role of various proxy forces. The real question, perhaps, is whether the White House's success in halting that particular conflict will embolden the presidency to assume new responsibilities as a peacemaker in other corners of the globe. We are just getting started uncovering all the nuances, so do not go anywhere. If you find this unfolding saga as riveting as we do, feel free to tap the like button or give us a thumbs up, letting us know that you want more coverage of these high-stakes diplomatic showdowns. It is a small gesture that can help us keep digging into the hidden corridors of international power. Continuing on, we see that one important upshot of Trump's emergent friendship with certain leaders, such as Rutte, is a partial recalibration of how Europe views its global role. Rutte's texts essentially credit Trump for pushing Europe to pay in a big way, setting the stage for the new 5% figure, a far cry from where the continent stood previously. This shift could herald a more autonomous Europe, one that invests more heavily in robust defense technology. It might encourage NATO members to ramp up their own arms industries, fostering job growth and new research. Yet, it is also a double-edged sword. Some critics worry that an arms race in Europe could escalate tensions with Russia or cause friction within the bloc if countries start competing for lucrative defense contracts rather than cooperating wholeheartedly. This leads us into the deeper, arguably philosophical question about NATO's future mission. NATO was initially designed as a defensive pact against possible aggression from the Soviet Union. Over time, especially after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, its scope expanded to encompass crisis management, counterterrorism, and cooperative security. Could we be seeing a shift back toward a more classic approach of prepare for a large-scale conflict, spurred by renewed concerns over Russia, Iran, or other threats? Might a heavier reliance on raw military strength overshadow the alliance's emphasis on diplomacy, humanitarian interventions, and peacekeeping missions? Or will this fresh infusion of resources and unity ironically enable NATO to become more agile and proactive in preventing conflicts through advanced intelligence and deterrence? There is another angle to consider. How does this newfound alignment affect the longtime critics of the president within Europe? For instance, some observers in Germany, France, and beyond spent years lambasting what they saw as Trump's bullying tactics. Even the possibility of backing out of the Mutual Defense Clause was widely interpreted as a threat to the entire post-World War II order. Yet now, with Rutte's praise reverberating around The Hague, we must question whether these same critics are rethinking their positions. Are they grudgingly accepting that Trump's unorthodox approach forced a necessary reckoning in NATO's budgeting and operational priorities? Or do they remain just as wary? While that remains unanswered, we do know from official statements that Poland, one of the most defense-focused nations in the alliance, already spends around 4.1% of its gross domestic product on defense, leading the pack. That is relatively close to the new 5% target. In contrast, the United States stands around 3.5%, though the White House contends that once defense-related expenditures, such as cybersecurity and other infrastructures, are factored in, it easily approaches or surpasses the target. Meanwhile, smaller NATO states are left wondering how on earth they will meet this goal in the face of fiscal constraints and political pushback at home. To illustrate the complexity, Spain hovers well below 2% in its defense spending. Reaching 5% requires either an enormous shift of funding away from other public sectors or a dramatic overhaul of taxation and budgetary priorities. Should the Spanish leadership fail to make these changes quickly, it risks condemnation on the global stage for not fulfilling NATO's updated obligations. But if it proceeds too aggressively, it could face severe protests from citizens or even meltdown within the government. This puzzle is far from unique to Spain. Many countries will grapple with similar dilemmas. Another layer entwined with the new spending targets is advanced technology. 1.5% of the agreed-upon figure is supposed to go toward essential infrastructure, including cyber warfare capabilities, intelligence gathering improvements, and next-generation communications networks. Already, we see proposals for Europe-wide collaborations that might unify data analytics, satellite imagery, and artificial intelligence enhancements under the NATO umbrella. The advantage is obvious. A consolidated and well-financed approach to 21st century threats could outpace aggressors who rely primarily on conventional tactics. The disadvantage is the possibility that Europe's private sector, which often leads in certain tech domains, might find itself either overshadowed by huge government contracts or saddled with complicated multinational regulations. Some high-ranking officials at the summit whispered concerns about duplication of efforts or bureaucratic entanglements. Others speculated that if managed correctly, the synergy of all those new resources could cement NATO's position as the most technologically advanced defensive coalition in history. The potential for that synergy is precisely what has drawn interest from defense contractors on both sides of the Atlantic. Hawks in the United States see an enormous opportunity to maximize armament exports, while European manufacturers are eager to prove they can match or even surpass American industrial might. Meanwhile, Trump, aware that arms deals often create American jobs, seems poised to welcome more negotiations on transatlantic defense production. But let us pivot back to the White House's remarkable role in diffusing the Israel-Iran episode. Ruta singled out this last-minute ceasefire as a shining example of what bold U.S. leadership can accomplish. While critics are careful to note that the ceasefire remains fragile, it underscores a pattern. President Trump is increasingly positioning himself as a power broker in some of the world's most volatile standoffs, whether in the Middle East, on Europe's eastern flank, or even in trade disputes with rival economies. The million-dollar question is whether this approach is sustainable or if it might force the United States into a nearly impossible role, ping-ponging from crisis to crisis. We should recall that it was not so long ago that skepticism about Trump's foreign policy soared. America First was widely interpreted as isolationist, calling into doubt the U.S. commitment to joint initiatives. So, it is all the more bewildering for some to see the White House championing a major hike in European defense spending, stepping in to personally ensure Israel stands down, and extending a friendly greeting to Zelenskyy. Are we witnessing a real pivot in American posture, or are we simply seeing a transactional approach, to be reevaluated every time new circumstances arise? For NATO's top brass, the hope is that this momentum will create an enduring foundation for cooperative security across continents. Now, if you have been absorbing this epic narrative and want to stay tuned for further revelations on these unfolding diplomatic dramas, subscribe so you will be the first to know when we break down the next blockbuster summit. With everything from potential arms races to Middle Eastern peace deals in play, we promise there is never a dull moment in the realm of global coordination. As we approach the climax of this scenario, let us revisit the puzzle of President Trump's ambiguous stance on Article 5. The entire NATO alliance rests on that bedrock principle. If one ally is attacked, all allies respond together. Historically, it has acted as the ultimate deterrent to large-scale aggression against NATO members. Yet Trump's jarring "it depends on your definition" line indeed left a swirl of doubts. Was it a test balloon, checking if Europe can do more for its own security? Was it simply an offhand remark taken out of context? Or does it signal that, despite improved relations, Trump might still question whether the United States will plunge into conflict for a smaller nation it deems unprepared or unwilling to pay its fair share? In many ways, the brand new 5% target is an attempt to remove that doubt. If Europe can rise to the challenge of paying for its own robust defense infrastructure, perhaps even overshadowing Russia's capabilities, then the impetus on the United States to intervene militarily in every instance might wane. Meanwhile, the reaffirmation of the principle of collective defense would remain intact, but with a more balanced approach among the allies. It is a vision championed by Mark Rutte's brand of leadership at NATO, one where Europe's strategic autonomy is bolstered, while the transatlantic bond is still strong. Looking to the weeks and months after the summit, this intensification of defense commitments might yield rapid policy shifts. Parliaments across Europe, from Berlin to Madrid, will be forced to debate major budget expansions, new allocations, and possibly controversial cuts in social spending or infrastructure. Rutte, for his part, has insisted that focusing on defense does not contradict social welfare. He contends that the overall security of the continent is a prerequisite for long-term prosperity, and that those who ignore mounting global threats do so at their peril. Zelensky's continuing presence in these conversations may also serve as a sobering reminder that Europe's eastern frontier remains unsettled. If Ukraine were ever to officially join NATO, the alliance would instantly share a border with Russia under extremely tense circumstances, requiring firm commitments from every member state. The issue remains delicate, especially when factoring in the complicated patchwork of conflicts in the Donbas region and the aftershocks of past escalations. As we bring our story to a close, let us remember that beyond the official communiques, a swirling undercurrent of skepticism, excitement, ambition, and anxiety characterizes this entire summit. Is the Trump administration forging a new era in transatlantic relations, moving beyond the old controversies to create an alliance that is bigger and bolder? Or are we simply seeing a momentary lull in tensions, soon to be tested by fresh outbreaks of discord and new conflicts that demand the alliance's attention? If there is one thing we can be sure of, it is that the conversations begun in The Hague will reverberate for months, if not years, to come. The questions of how to fund this leap to 5%, how to handle Ukraine's membership aspirations, and how to solidify the precarious peace between Israel and Iran remain wide open. The personalities involved, from Trump's unpredictable style to Ruta's enthusiastic championing, only heighten the sense that we are teetering on the brink of a groundbreaking shift in global power dynamics. In the end, the only certainty is that the tapestry of NATO has been fundamentally altered, and it will likely never be quite the same. From the thunderous applause that greeted Trump's arrival to the hush that followed his cryptic statement on Article 5, everything about this summit has seized the world's attention. Some hail it as the birth of a stronger alliance under tough love from Washington. Others fear it is a precarious balancing act that might crumble. Time alone will tell which viewpoint carries the day. Yet, as you reflect on the powerful transformations taking shape on the world stage, remember that these decisions, made in high-profile summits with all the diplomatic fanfare, do, in fact, filter down to everyday life in countless ways, from how taxes are allocated, to changes in industries that supply the new defense demands, to the broader stability of entire regions. That is precisely why it is so critical to pay attention to events like the Hague Summit. When national leaders speak of big percentages, game-changing alliances, and bold new directions, they are not just rattling off numbers, they are sculpting the future global landscape. And that wraps our deep dive into the NATO summit, where surprising friendships, ambitious spending targets, and tenuous ceasefires all collide in a swirling arena of political drama. Thank you for staying with us through every twist and turn of this extraordinary gathering. No matter where you stand on the issues, it has been a wild ride. And it is not over yet.